The conference room smelled like desperation and cheap cologne. You know that smell? It's the specific mix of fear, sweat, and the ozone stink of overheating laptops when someone's about to get axed. I was sitting at that polished table, the one I'd argued against buying 5 years ago when we were still bootstrapping out of a strip mall in Tempe, watching Preston Hayes pace back and forth like a caged tiger hopped up on energy drinks and business school buzzwords. Preston Hayes, the founder's son, the guy who thought the cloud was something you could literally touch if you climbed high enough. Me? I'm Gordon Brooks, 48 years old, been the senior systems architect here at Summit Logistics for 18 years, and I don't dye my grays because I earned every silver strand debugging server crashes at 3 a.m. while Preston was probably cramming for his MBA finals. If you're here for corporate train wreck stories, stick around. This ride's about to go completely off the rails, and I'm driving the getaway car. We need to talk about velocity, Preston said, stopping to admire his reflection in the glass wall. Kid was wearing a vest that cost more than my monthly truck payment. We need to talk about trimming the fat. The room went silent. That kind of silence where you can hear the air conditioning humming and everyone's blood pressure spiking like we were all about to have simultaneous heart attacks. There were 10 of us around that mahogany table. Engineers, project leads, data folks, people with mortgages, kids in college, the works. And Preston, fresh out of Northwestern with an MBA that apparently taught him people were just spreadsheet rows you could delete to make the quarterly numbers turn green. I sipped my lukewarm coffee. Tasted like battery acid mixed with broken dreams. Preston, I said, keeping my voice level like I was explaining something to a particularly slow child. Our velocity is fine. We just shipped the Q3 update with 0 downtime. The system architecture is rock solid. You start cutting now, you're going to hit muscle and bone, not fat. He turned to me with that look. Not just dismissive, bored, like he'd already made his decision Tuesday on the golf course and was just going through the corporate theater on Thursday because someone told him that's what leaders do. Gordon, he sighed, like he was explaining gravity to someone who thought the earth was flat. That's exactly the problem. You're obsessed with stability. We need disruption, innovation. You built a fortress, sure, but we need a speedboat, and frankly, your approach is looking pretty vintage these days. Vintage. I felt that familiar vein in my forehead start throbbing like a tiny jackhammer. I'd built the route optimization system that cut our delivery times by 15%. I'd written the backup protocols that saved our collective rear ends when the Phoenix power grid went down last summer and half the city lost electricity. I was the guy who took his father Walter's napkin sketches, literally drawn on cocktail napkins during a business dinner, and turned them into a logistics engine currently valued at $28 million. Vintage keeps the lights on, Preston, I said, fighting to keep my tone professional. You want to disrupt the system architecture? Fine. But do it after holiday shipping season. You start ripping out the foundation while the house is still standing, the whole thing comes crashing down. Preston smirked. It was a practiced expression, like he'd been rehearsing it in the bathroom mirror that morning. See, that's fear talking, Gordon. We're moving to a new paradigm. Agile, lean, young. He paused for dramatic effect, drumming his manicured fingers on the table like he was keeping time to some imaginary victory march. Which brings me to the difficult part. We're restructuring the systems division. We're bringing in outside consultants to modernize our technology stack. Your role is redundant. The air got sucked out of the room like someone had opened an airlock. Lucas Murphy, my second in command and the best database guy I'd ever worked with, looked like he might lose his breakfast. The kid stared at me with wide eyes, waiting for me to explode, flip the table, start throwing office supplies around the room. Redundant, I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air like a toxic cloud. That's an interesting choice of words. Think of it as an evolutionary exit, Preston said, using a phrase that definitely came straight from some LinkedIn thought leader with disruptor in his bio. Security's waiting downstairs in the lobby with a cardboard box. We'll need your security badge and company laptop, effective immediately. It was a power move, a public execution designed to show the rest of the pack who was the alpha dog in this particular corporate jungle. He wanted me to cry, to beg, to make a scene he could retell at the country club over expensive whiskey. Had to fire the old guard today. Sometimes you need to clear out the deadwood to make room for fresh growth. I stood up slowly. My knees popped. 18 years of hunching over keyboards and crawling under server racks will do that to a man. But instead of the rage I expected to feel, this strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of a demolition expert who knows the fuse is already lit and everyone else in the building is standing way too close to the explosives. I looked around the room one more time. At the whiteboard covered in my system diagrams, my logic flows, my architectural decisions that had kept this company profitable for nearly 2 decades. At the faces of engineers who'd learned everything they knew from me, who were now staring at their hands because they couldn't bear to meet my eyes. I was reaching for my beaten-up messenger bag, the same one I'd been carrying since Bush was president, the first Bush, when my phone started buzzing against the polished conference table. Not a text message, a phone call, and I never ever took phone calls during meetings. My phone was supposed to be on silent mode. The vibration rattled against that expensive wood like a tiny earthquake demanding attention. I glanced down at the screen. The caller ID didn't say spam risk or extended warranty department. It said something much more interesting. Carlos Rivera, VP Engineering, Pacific Freight Systems. I knew Carlos. We'd met at a logistics technology conference in Las Vegas about 3 years back. We'd hit it off talking shop over overpriced convention center beer, stayed in touch trading war stories about database scaling nightmares, and the unique challenges of keeping delivery trucks moving when everything from weather to traffic to server crashes tried to stop them. Carlos had been trying to recruit me for almost 2 years, sending the occasional email about opportunities, but I'd always politely declined. Loyalty, you know? This was my house, my system, my baby. But right now, I wasn't loyal to anything. Right now, I was redundant. The phone kept buzzing insistently. Preston looked annoyed, probably thinking this was just another example of my unprofessional old-school behavior. Turn that thing off, Gordon. You can take your personal calls from the parking lot like everyone else. I looked at Preston. I looked at my team, the terrified faces of engineers who knew exactly what kind of impossible workload was about to land on their shoulders. Then I looked back down at that still buzzing phone, and that's when a beautifully twisted, absolutely perfect idea bloomed in my head. That idea was unprofessional, it was petty, it was absolutely beautiful in its simplicity, and it was about to change everything. I didn't decline the call. I didn't silence the phone like any reasonable person would do in a termination meeting. Instead, I did something that would haunt Preston Hayes for months to come. I swiped to accept, and while maintaining absolutely dead eye contact with the man who had just called me obsolete, I pressed the speaker button. "This is Gordon," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly electric silence of the conference room. Carlos Rivera's voice filled that boardroom like a perfectly timed lightning strike, crisp, urgent, and unmistakably desperate in the way that only a VP facing a major technical crisis can sound. "Gordon, thank God you picked up," Carlos's voice boomed through the phone's speakers. "Look, my HR team just pinged me that your LinkedIn status flipped to open to work about 10 minutes ago. Please tell me you actually updated that yourself, because if you did, I need you yesterday. We are absolutely drowning on this geographical routing integration project. Your research paper on spatial optimization algorithms is literally the only thing that makes sense of what we're trying to build here. I can get an offer letter sent over in the next 15 minutes. Base salary $165,000, signing bonus $25,000, full equity package with quarterly vesting, and I'll personally handle your relocation expenses to San Diego. Just tell me you're available to start." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of profound, atmospheric silence you get right before a major earthquake, when even the birds stop singing because they sense something catastrophic is about to happen. Preston's confident smirk faltered like a cheap suit in the rain. His eyebrows furrowed as his brain tried to process 2 completely contradictory pieces of information. Gordon Brooks is an obsolete dinosaur who needs to be put out to pasture, and one of the biggest logistics companies on the West Coast just offered to back up a money truck for him in under 30 seconds. Is this some kind of joke? Preston laughed, but it wasn't his usual confident chuckle. This was nervous, barking laughter that sounded like a small dog trying to scare off a much larger predator. Who exactly is that supposed to be? Pacific Freight Systems, I said, my voice colder than a server room at midnight. your biggest competitor in the Southwest logistics market. Well then, take it, Preston sneered, doubling down on his stupidity because his MBA-inflated ego wouldn't let him back down now. If they want to pay premium prices for my leftovers, that's their mistake. Go ahead, Gordon. Take their offer. Carlos, listening through the phone's speaker, heard every word of that exchange. Gordon, who the hell is that? Are you in some kind of meeting right now? I smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a poker player who just realized he's been dealt a royal flush while everyone else at the table was betting their college funds on a pair of twos. Carlos, I said, speaking loud enough for everyone in the room to hear clearly. I'm currently sitting in a conference room with the chief operating officer of my soon-to-be former company. He just informed me that my 18 years of experience building and maintaining their core systems makes me redundant. He says, "You're welcome to have me, since I'm apparently obsolete." He said, "What?" Carlos asked, and I could hear genuine shock and disbelief in his voice. In the tech world, firing a senior architect without a transition plan isn't just stupid, it's corporate suicide. He said, and I quote, "Take the offer," I replied calmly, never breaking eye contact with Preston. "So Carlos, please send over those documents." For exactly 10 seconds, the only sound in that conference room was the overhead projector's cooling fan wheezing like an old man with emphysema. Everyone stared at the phone like it had just sprouted legs and started dancing on the table. "I'm sending the offer letter right now," Carlos replied immediately. "Check your personal email in about 2 minutes. And Gordon, I meant what I said about that signing bonus. We desperately need you in San Diego by Monday morning if you can manage it. I'll cover moving expenses, temporary housing, whatever you need. Just promise me you won't sign anything with those idiots until you've seen our complete compensation package." "Understood completely," I said. "I'm hanging up now, Carlos. Looking forward to discussing the future." The line went dead with a soft click. I set my phone down on that polished mahogany table. The black screen reflected Preston's face, and he looked exactly like someone who had just swallowed a live hornet but was trying to pretend it was a breath mint. His brain was clearly struggling to process what had just happened. On one hand, he'd spent the last 15 minutes explaining to the entire leadership team why Gordon Brooks was dead weight that needed to be cut loose. On the other hand, one of their primary competitors had just offered me a package worth over $200,000 in the first year alone, in less time than it takes to order coffee at Starbucks. Preston chose to double down on denial. Denial is powerful medicine, especially when your father's name is on the building and you've never faced real consequences for being wrong. "Well," Preston scoffed, straightening his expensive cuffs like a peacock preening its feathers. That was certainly theatrical. "Very impressive performance. Did you set this whole thing up beforehand? Have your buddy call during the meeting and pretend to be some VP?" My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Carlos Rivera is the Vice President of Engineering at Pacific Freight Systems, Preston. You can Google him if you want to verify that. You could also check the speaker roster from that TechCrunch logistics panel you were supposed to participate in last year, but skipped because you were networking in Cabo San Lucas." Lucas Murphy finally found his voice, though it came out sounding like he'd been breathing helium. "Preston, that was definitely Carlos Rivera. He literally wrote the industry-standard white paper on distributed hash table optimization. If he's calling Gordon directly, it means absolutely nothing," Preston snapped, slamming his palm down on the conference table hard enough to make the wireless presentation remote jump. "It means Gordon's good at networking and name-dropping, doesn't mean he can actually code for the modern web environment. We need React rockstars and cloud-native architects, not whatever legacy back-end systems he's been hoarding like some kind of digital pack rat." My phone lit up again with a soft chime. Email notification. Subject line: "Offer letter. Senior infrastructure architect position." I didn't open it immediately. I just let it sit there on my phone screen, glowing like a small beacon of vindication in the corporate wasteland Preston was creating around us. "Legacy back-end systems," I repeated slowly, savoring each word like fine bourbon. "That legacy mess processes 22,000 transactions per day, Preston. It handles the routing logic for your entire fleet of trucks. It's not a mess. It's a cathedral. And you're firing the architect because you want to tear it down and put up a strip mall. We have comprehensive documentation." Preston waved his hand dismissively, like he was swatting away an annoying fly. "We have the company wiki. We have detailed code comments. Any competent junior developer fresh out of coding boot camp could pick up this system and run with it." I glanced at Lucas. Lucas stared down at the table like he was trying to memorize the wood grain pattern. We both knew the truth about that comprehensive documentation. The company wiki hadn't been updated in over 2 years because Preston had slashed the budget for technical writing staff. The code comments were cryptic notes I'd written to myself during late-night debugging sessions, mostly inside jokes and classic rock lyrics that I used as mental anchors for complex logic flows. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You really believe the documentation is sufficient?" "I absolutely know it is," Preston declared with the confidence of someone who had never actually tried to read technical documentation written by someone else. "I've personally reviewed the folder structure. It's all there in black and white. Now please hand over your company laptop so we can move forward with the transition." Penny Collins, our normally silent API engineer, raised her hand tentatively like she was back in middle school asking permission to use the bathroom. She looked absolutely terrified. Preston? Quick question about the encryption keys for the automated load balancing protocols. Are those documented in the wiki somewhere? Because the last time we tried to apply a security patch without Gordon walking us through it, the entire database cluster locked up for about 8 hours and we nearly lost the FedEx contract. Preston whirled on her like a prosecutor who just spotted a hostile witness. "We will figure it out, Penny. That's literally what I'm paying you people to do." This is exactly what I'm talking about when I mention toxic dependency culture. Gordon has deliberately made himself an irreplaceable bottleneck to artificially inflate his value proposition. By removing him from the equation, I'm liberating all of you to reach your full potential, liberating them. Right. Like removing the pilot liberates the passengers on a transcontinental flight. I stood up slowly, sliding my phone into my jacket pocket. The battery felt warm against my chest, like a small furnace of vindication. "You know what, Preston?" I said, my voice achieving that deadly calm that every engineer recognizes as the sound of someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. "You're completely right. I have been a bottleneck. I've been personally catching every coding error, every bad database commit, every catastrophic system failure before any of it could reach your clients and cost you money. I've been the dam holding back a flood of technical disasters. But if you want liberation from that kind of protection, then be my guest. Be free." I closed my laptop, a battered ThinkPad covered in conference stickers dating back to 2010 when people still thought tablets might replace computers. I unplugged the HDMI cable connecting it to the room's presentation system. The big screen on the wall flickered and went blue. "No blue screen of death?" Preston mocked, clearly thinking he was being clever. I expected more drama from the great Gordon Brooks. "The drama comes later," I said matter-of-factly. "Usually around 2 a.m. on Saturday nights when normal people are sleeping and systems decide to have nervous breakdowns." I unclipped my security badge from my belt. It was an old badge, with a photo taken about 8 years ago when I still had some optimism in my eyes and less caffeine permanently dissolved in my bloodstream. I slid it across that polished mahogany table, watching it spin like a coin before coming to rest directly in front of Preston. "There you go," I said. "I'm officially gone. You got exactly what you wanted. The fat has been trimmed." "Don't let the door hit you on your way out," Preston muttered, already pulling out his phone to check his cryptocurrency portfolio or whatever it is that people with too much inherited money do when they're bored. I walked toward those glass conference room doors. My work boots clicked against the polished concrete floor, a sound that used to mean the expert is coming to fix things but now meant the adult has left the building. "Wait a minute," Lucas called out suddenly, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward into the wall. Pure panic filled his voice. "Gordon, what about the master credentials for the AWS root account? The multi-factor authentication system. It's all tied to your personal device." I stopped at the door and turned around slowly. The entire room went dead silent. Preston looked up from his phone with the expression of someone who had just realized he might have made a tiny mistake. "What root access?" Preston demanded, his voice climbing about half an octave. Lucas was practically stammering now. "The master administrative access. It's tied to Gordon's phone. If he leaves the building, we can't push emergency fixes to the production servers. We can't access the backup systems. We basically can't touch anything critical." "Well then transfer it immediately," Preston said, rolling his eyes like this was the most obvious solution in the world. "Right now. Problem solved." I looked at Lucas, then back at Preston. and suddenly remembered the ironclad security policy that Preston himself had forced the entire company to implement about 3 years ago. A policy designed to prevent departing employees from stealing intellectual property, but written so aggressively that it cut both ways like a double-edged sword. "I can't do that, Preston," I said, allowing myself a small, cold smile. "What do you mean you can't?" Preston demanded, his voice getting louder. "Just do it. Transfer the access. It's not complicated." "You just fired me," I said, my smile getting a little wider. "My employment has been terminated, effective immediately. Which means that according to company Security Policy Section 4, Paragraph 2, which you personally wrote and made everyone sign, I am now strictly prohibited from accessing, transferring, or modifying any company systems whatsoever. If I touch that root account access right now, I would be committing federal corporate espionage." "I'm giving you authorization," Preston shouted, his face starting to turn that particular shade of red that suggests someone's blood pressure is approaching dangerous levels. "You can't authorize a non-employee to access administrative systems," I replied calmly. "That would instantly void your security compliance certifications. You'd lose your insurance coverage. You'd lose your contracts with every major shipping company. Your father would probably fire you before the ink dried on the incident report." "Then we'll just reset everything remotely," Preston yelled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "We'll call the support department. Just get out of here." "Absolutely," I said, pushing the door open. "Good luck with that reset process. Last time I checked, Amazon Web Services requires 48 hours to verify corporate identity before they'll reset root access credentials. Hope nothing breaks between now and Tuesday." I walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. The hallway air felt cleaner somehow, like I'd just escaped from a building that had been slowly filling with toxic gas. Behind me, I could hear Preston starting to yell at someone, probably Lucas. Definitely not solving any problems. Walking out of a building you helped design from the ground up is a surreal experience. I passed the server room on the second floor, my technological baby. Through the fire-rated door, I could hear the familiar hum of cooling fans, that rhythmic industrial purr I'd fine-tuned over 18 years of late nights and weekend emergencies. I knew which server rack vibrated slightly when the air conditioning kicked into high gear, which hard drive in Cluster C made that faint clicking sound that meant it would need replacement within 6 months. It wasn't just hardware anymore, it was a living organism, and I had just been surgically removed from its immune system. People stared as I walked down the hallway carrying my messenger bag and a small cardboard box of personal items. Word travels faster in a tech company than data packets through fiber optic cables. The Slack channels were probably melting down right now. "Did you hear?" Preston finally did it. "Gordon's gone. We're completely screwed." I saw heads ducking behind monitors. I saw pity in some faces, genuine fear in others. But I didn't stop to say goodbye to anyone. Goodbyes are for people who plan to stay friends. And I wasn't planning to be friends with anyone who had just watched me get publicly executed without saying a word. The first week at Pacific Freight Systems felt like stepping out of a cramped basement and into a luxury penthouse. My new office had actual windows with mountain views. The coffee was not only hot, but actually tasted like coffee instead of industrial solvent. My team, 8 experienced developers who actually listened when I spoke, treated my technical opinions like valuable insights instead of obstacles to their startup fantasies. I'd be lying if I said I didn't keep a browser tab permanently open to Down Detector, specifically monitoring Summit logistics. For the first 3 days, nothing happened. That's the thing about well-built systems. They have momentum. A properly engineered platform can coast for a while on autopilot, even when the pilot has been thrown out of the cockpit. Thursday morning, the first wobble appeared. I got a text message from Lucas using a burner signal account. Technically, we weren't supposed to communicate, corporate espionage concerns and all that legal nonsense. "Gordon, the load balancing system is acting weird. Response time's up 300%. Preston told us to just reboot all the server clusters." I typed back, "Don't reboot during peak hours. The cache memory needs time to warm up properly. If you reboot now, you'll create a thundering herd problem that will crash everything." "I know." I told him exactly that. He said, and I quote, "Just reboot it. It's just a computer." We rebooted. Now the database CPU usage is pegged at 100% and climbing. I sipped my excellent Pacific Freight coffee and watched the little red line on Down Detector start ticking upward. Small spike in user complaints. App running slow. Can't log in to driver portal. I didn't reply to Lucas. I couldn't. Helping him would mean helping Preston, and Preston needed to learn that gravity still worked even if you didn't believe in it. Friday afternoon, the wobble became a full earthquake. I was in a strategic planning meeting with Carlos, mapping out our new predictive delivery system, when Summit's public status page updated with those beautiful words every competitor loves to see: degraded performance, multiple Southwest regions. Looks like your former colleagues are having some technical difficulties, Carlos observed, glancing at my second monitor. He wasn't gloating. In this business, watching a competitor struggle is just part of market intelligence. They're rebooting server clusters, I said, watching the error reports multiply. They're trying to fix a memory leak that isn't actually a memory leak, it's a queue backup. How can you tell? Carlos asked. Because I designed that queue system to back up automatically when the fraud detection algorithms get too aggressive. It's a safety valve. When they reboot the servers, they're flushing the safety valve. All the fraud checks will start failing open. That sounds expensive, Carlos said with the kind of understatement that only seasoned tech executives can manage. It was expensive. Back at Summit, as I learned later through my network of still employed contacts, it was absolute chaos. Preston had brought in his consultant team, 3 guys wearing identical Patagonia vests who specialized in agile digital transformation but couldn't read a basic database query without having panic attacks. They were staring at dashboards full of red warning lights, shouting buzzwords like they were magical incantations. "We need to scale horizontally," one of them yelled. "Spin up more server instances immediately," Preston commanded, probably feeling very important and decisive. So they did exactly that. They spun up 30 additional servers in about 10 minutes. Here's the thing about the system I built. It had a hard-coded license limit on our third-party mapping service. The contract I'd negotiated 3 years earlier allowed for exactly 75 concurrent connections to save money on licensing fees. When they spun up 30 new servers, the total connection count hit 105. The mapping provider's automated monitoring system detected the contract violation and, following the exact terms I'd agreed to, instantly revoked our API access key. Friday, 4:17 p.m. Every single delivery driver in Arizona, Nevada, and Southern California lost their navigation systems simultaneously. I watched it happen in real time on social media. Twitter exploded with angry customers and confused drivers. My delivery app just went blank, stuck in Phoenix traffic with no GPS. Driver can't find my address, support line is busy. Lucas sent me a single word via Signal: blackout. I sat in my ergonomic chair in my new office watching the digital equivalent of a 5-car pileup from the safety of the competition. I imagined Preston in that conference room, screaming at his consultants, screaming at Lucas, screaming at anyone within reach while completely failing to understand what had gone wrong or how to fix it. The weekend brought lawyers, which I'd expected. When narcissists fail, their first instinct isn't introspection, it's finding someone else to blame. Monday morning, I received a furious email from Summit's legal department demanding I return proprietary system documentation and administrative credentials within 2 hours or face federal charges for corporate sabotage. I responded professionally, explaining that I'd surrendered all company property during my termination, that all documentation existed in their own systems, and that their current team's inability to locate files wasn't theft, it was incompetence. I also mentioned that any request for my assistance now constituted consulting work, billable at $20,500 per hour with a 10-hour minimum. The phone call came Tuesday morning. Walter Hayes, Preston's father and company founder. His voice sounded like he'd aged 20 years in 5 days. "Gordon, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee?" 1 hour later, I was sitting across from Walter in a Starbucks, watching him slide a blank check across the small table. "Name your price," he said simply. "Come back. We'll restructure everything. You can fire Preston if you want. Just please fix this before we lose every client we have." I looked at that check for a long moment. The temptation was real. Not for revenge, but for the satisfaction of walking back in there as the conquering hero, stepping over Preston's career corpse, and reclaiming my technological kingdom. But then I thought about my new team at Pacific, about Carlos who actually listened to my ideas, about building something new instead of constantly patching something old. "I can't come back as an employee, Walter," I said, "but I'll consult. 1 weekend, I'll rebuild your core routing system so you don't go bankrupt. $400,000 paid in advance, and I retain intellectual property rights to anything I create." Walter didn't even hesitate. Done. That weekend, I spent 48 hours in the empty Summit office, rebuilding their system from scratch. I made it faster, more efficient, more stable than the original. But I also made sure my digital signature was embedded in every line of code, along with licensing terms that meant I owned the technology they needed to survive. 3 months later, I'm sitting in my Pacific office watching the sunset over San Diego Bay. Summit Logistics stabilized. They're not going out of business, but they're not innovating either. They've become the safe, boring option for companies that prioritize reliability over cutting-edge features. Preston is gone, reportedly trying to launch some kind of blockchain-based fitness app. I give it 6 months before he forgets all the passwords. Walter still calls me monthly to authorize licensing renewals for my code. I always answer on the second ring. I like the sound of passive income. My phone buzzes with another email from Summit's new CEO asking about optimizing the code architecture for improved performance metrics. I forward it to Pacific's legal department with a note about doubled consulting rates. I'm not angry anymore. I moved past anger months ago. What I achieved was something far more valuable than revenge. I achieved leverage. I built their foundation, watched them tear it down, then made them buy it back from me at premium rates. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's forcing people to pay you handsomely for their own survival while you build something better somewhere else. The air conditioning hums perfectly overhead. My system is running smoothly, and this time, I have all the keys.